What is a shadow person or shadow entity? Are they something negative or demonic or something else entirely? Is there a connection between people experiencing sleep paralysis and seeing these shadow entities? Are they harmful, and are there different types of shadow entities? And what about the doppelganger phenomena? Is it real, and what does it mean when people experience this? Is there a connection between poltergeist activity and psychokinesis, or is poltergeist activity just the result of a ghost stirring up activity in a location? Longtime paranormal author, researcher, and investigator Mike Ricsecker joins me as we discuss these topics and more. Okay, so my guest tonight is Mike Ricsecker. Mike is a longtime paranormal investigator who has now written several books related to the paranormal, including Encounters with the Paranormal, Ghost Story and Case Files Volume 1, and A Walk in the Shadows about the mysterious shadow entities, which we're going to hopefully talk a little bit about tonight. Mike has also established an online community called Connected Universe, where he delves into paranormal topics as well and offers classes and workshops. Mike, thank you so much for joining me on the show tonight.
Yeah, absolutely, Curry. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's exciting to have you on. This topic about the some people say shadow people, shadow entities, is one I've never really delved into on this show before. So I'm really hoping we can kind of get into that a little bit. But before we do that, maybe if you could take us back to how this crazy journey started for you, how you got involved in the paranormal and doing what you do now.
Yeah, there's a number of things that happened to me while growing up. All goes back to my childhood, and really it starts with an experience with a shadow figure. And this was my first significant paranormal experience as a child when I was about 8 years old. Woke up in the middle of the night and there was this tall, dark figure standing in the corner of my room. Now, at that time, I had no idea from, shadow people, shadow entities, whatever. I just thought there was an intruder in the house and it was about to kill me, because that's about what you think at the age of 8. But of course, I'm still alive to tell the tale, which is, good news. So, yeah. So, what this thing did was very unusual, and I was very frightened, very scared. I tried to scream. My mouth opened up, and nothing could come out. And this thing approached my bed, leaned over, and I'm just looking up into this black face. There's no eyes, no nose, no mouth, nothing. It's just all black. And it actually grabbed me by the wrist, crossed my arms across my body, and then ran off down the hall. I had no idea at the time why it did this, and I ended up finding my voice, finding my legs, ran off to my parents' bedroom, just screaming. And, they told me that I just had a bad dream. They tried to console me, all that sort of thing. But, I had been awake for this whole thing. This was not just a dream. So that was my first experience with a shadow entity. I had a second one when I was about 13 years old. We were moving into a new house. But when I knew that this was a path that I was going to take in doing this research, I was about 15 years old. It was, the end of the freshman year of high school. And my friend David and I were at our friend Lori's house, and we're just kind of shooting the breeze, talking teen drama, that sort of stuff. She lived in an older historic home in the downtown of the town that we lived in. And all of a sudden she says, "I think my house is haunted." And David and I are instantly intrigued, like, okay, what's going on here? So she tells us about the family cemetery that's in the backyard, different strange things happening around the house. And the big thing for her was that everything that she would try to tack up on this one wall in her bedroom would always fall down, whether it was like an hour, a day, a week later. She couldn't keep anything tacked up on this wall. So David and I are going to go investigate. So we go upstairs, we're checking out the room, checking out the wall. And I didn't understand at that time that my friend David was a very sensitive guy, sensitive to the paranormal is what I mean. And he ended up putting his hand flat to the wall. And all of a sudden, as he's standing there with his hand flat on the wall like that, he starts sweating profusely and turns bright red. And I'm looking at my friend David like, oh my gosh, what's going on with him? I didn't understand this. Never seen anything like this before. And so he started going from wall to wall in the house trying to find like the quote unquote hot spots. And that was the moment that I knew that this was something that I was going to keep delving into for the rest of my life. That I was absolutely intrigued. I'd already been reading things like Hans Holzer and doing whatever research I could at that time. It was late 80s, early 90s. We didn't have the internet. I was in a small town, no library, so it was whatever I could get my hands on. But that was that moment that I knew that this was going to be something I was going to pursue.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and it happens that way, I think, for a lot of people who delve into this field. It's usually an experience. I'd say it was a little bit different for me. I had more heard of stories from a lot of other people, and a lot of people that had told me they'd had paranormal experiences, and that kind of piqued my interest after I'd continued to hear people I considered to be pretty credible to talk about experiences they had had, even though I'd never had any of my own. But I did find, your stories very similar to a lot of others who, delve into this field. They kind of want to make sense either of experiences they've had at younger ages. Now, Mike, did you have anybody else in your family who had experienced the paranormal? A father, mother, brother, sister, anybody else have experiences?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. My father, he doesn't really believe in this sort of thing, although he has his own little ghost story, and it's kind of funny because every once in a while he'll tell it and be like, "Dad, that's a ghost story." And I was like, "No." But my mother was a believer, well, still is, but well, we moved into a new home from that house with the shadow entity that crossed my arms. That was a house that we lived in Massachusetts. We moved back to our home state of Ohio when I was 13 years old, and as I'm like unpacking boxes and putting things away, I kept seeing this figure standing in the doorway to my bedroom. I'd turn and look, and it would take off down the hall. And this happened multiple times. I'd be putting something away, unpacking the box, and I'd see him standing there. And he was, about the size of, your average male. Couldn't really see any features. He was translucent, so it was a little bit different than the one that I saw when I was younger. But again, very quick when he would run off. So after this happened several times, I told my mother about it. And I guess because I was 13 years old at the time, she thought maybe I was a little bit more mature, and she acknowledged that she had seen it too. But she didn't seem alarmed. She was just kind of very matter of fact, like, "Oh yeah, I've seen that," which was great for me. It was, an affirmation of the thing that I had seen, and she didn't worry me. It was just like, "Oh, okay, yeah, this is something that's here," kind of very nonchalant about it. So, um, I didn't worry about it, and I actually got playful with the thing and started calling him Tom, as in like peeping Tom, because it was basically peeping in my bedroom. And so anytime I'd see him
Sure.
after that, I'd say, "Hi, Tom," and he'd go running off. And so yeah, my mother's a believer. She has seen some things, and it's kind of interesting because my dad, he's had at least one experience, though he won't really admit to that being a paranormal experience. So so my parents are on opposite ends, but yeah, I do have some family that have seen things.
So that first experience you had, I think you said 8 years old.
Mhm.
This shadow entity, I don't know. Some people call them people. Are we just merely talking about something that looks like a shadow figure of a person? What are we physically wise? What are we talking about?
Yeah, physically, there are a lot of different types of entities or phenomena that we witness. Yeah, people is a term because a lot of times they come off looking like a human figure. It looks like a person, but sometimes they're just like a mist or a wisp or almost like a vapor. We have crawlers. We have these entities with the hats. We have hooded figures. So they come in all different shapes and sizes. Some are very short, while others are very tall. So shadow people is a term that's been thrown out there a lot, but really I would tend to say like shadow entities or shadow phenomena because there are a lot of different varieties of these things.
Now, is kind of the theory on these that they have never taken human form? Is there what's what's kind of the going theory, if you will, on who these entities may be?
Well, that depends on the actual shadow itself. So, um, some, what I'll say this, what I would call a kind of quote unquote true shadow person is an interdimensional being that has traveled here from some other plane of existence. However, some of these shadows that we witness are simply just human spirits that can't fully manifest as an apparition. So they just come off as a shadowy form. They may be, yeah, I mean, they could just be somebody's, Aunt Tilda who is trying to visit. Maybe she's expended a lot of energy, and all she can do is manifest as a shadow. I have seen one. It was a little girl who originated as this billowing smoke from down a hallway. It was at a um, historic hotel in Alton, Illinois called the Mineral Springs Hotel. We were running a paranormal investigation following an event that we had run, and there were 5 of us that saw this. It was this billowing smoke coming up from down the hall, and it morphed into the apparition of a little girl. So, that's one there. That's a human spirit, but they could be human spirits. They could be interdimensional beings. Some of these may be time travelers or extraterrestrials. So it just really depends on the particular shadow.
Yeah, and I'm assuming it probably also depends on the person who's experiencing it as well. Kind of what everybody seems to have their own filter when they have experiences about how they, basically about how they do experience things. Maybe some think that they may be, I don't know, negative entities. What's kind of your sense? Are some of these perhaps negative, or what's been your experience?
Yeah, some of them are negative. Now, there are people out there that will say that, all shadow entities are evil and they're the darkest of the dark and that sort of thing. And, it's not the case. Yes, there are some that are, but this is going to sound very simplistic. But what I end up saying is that, shadow people in some ways are like people. While some people are good and some people are bad, some shadow people are good and some shadow people are bad. Again, it just depends on the particular shadow. I've been on cases where there have been nasty, nefarious shadow entities, but then there are others that are rather benign. Most of them to me are just benign because they're just most of the times they're just standing there watching, observing. We don't really know why, but that's mostly what they're doing. Others, there have been cases in which they're actually rather benevolent. So again, it just depends on the particular shadow.
Now, any cases that you've been involved in or researched where people have been physically harmed by these type of entities?
Yeah, it does happen on occasion where somebody will get scratched, pushed, shoved. The nastiest case that I've been on was in regards to a red-eyed shadow entity, and this was actually a case in which we filmed for The Haunted, which aired on Animal Planet a good 10 years ago now. And in that particular case, it was an adult daughter of the family. She was being terrorized by this thing that she kept seeing in her closet. It would come into her room, kind of filter down the hallway of the house. Would terrorize her, would terrorize the cat. Other members of the family would see this thing, and the state of mind of the girl was getting progressively worse. Now, we investigated this case for several months because we were trying to determine, okay, what is actually causing this problem? Is it perhaps a nasty human spirit? Because many of humans, when they end up in spirit form, are in many ways the way they were when they were in life. So if you're a nice person in life, you're probably a nice spirit, but if you're a jerk in life, you're a jerk in death too. And so we end up on cases sometimes in which we're just dealing with a nasty human spirit because he was just a jerk in life. So we had to kind of cross that off our list because the house had a lot of dark history with it. There were a couple of suicides, a couple of attempted suicides. So, was this perhaps the older gentleman who had taken his life with a rifle back in the 1950s, right in that room where she had slept? So we had to eliminate those sort of things. And what we ended up, after we crossed a lot of these things off the list, we were deducing that, this is something that was on the land prior to them building the house and was influencing people in that house, was wearing down their psyche. And that's what was happening with her. She was, as we were doing these investigations, she was getting worse and worse and worse. She was oppressed. What we would call oppression. And by the time we got Carl Johnson, a renowned demonologist, in on the case, she was borderline possession. So we brought him out to cleanse the house. And this was a big segment that they filmed for the show. And as we were cleansing the house and blessing it and saying prayers over it and all that, we had told the family to stay outside while we did this. She had come in to use the restroom, and at some point she ended up in the master bedroom talking at something unseen against the wall. Why are you here? Why do you keep terrorizing us? That sort of thing. So Carl did a blessing over her, and when he did this, she just doubled over in pain, like she had just got punched in the gut, and just audible like that. And what's interesting is I was running an audio recorder at that time, and you hear in that bit of audio that as he's doing this blessing, you hear this word "die," and then her double over in pain, and she fell on the ground. We picked her up. She was okay, but she was physically assaulted right there. And we continued on, with that cleansing of the house, and it was successful, which is good. But that was one in which she was actually physically attacked and had been going through oppression before that.
Now, I know you used the term oppression, but you did not use the term demonic.
This was one that was actually a demonic case, yeah.
Okay. And have you dealt with very many of those in your many years of paranormal investigating?
Yeah, they are not as common as television would like to make you to believe. Television, it seems like every show has to have some sort of demon going on. That is the only demonic case that I have dealt with. And I've been involved some way, shape, or form with the paranormal for 30 years. Carl Johnson, he's been doing this for over 50 years. He is a renowned demonologist. And I was talking with him, just this past fall, we had him on our show. He's a very good friend of mine. And I had asked him that question. So, Carl, you've been doing this a long time. And we got into the, talk about how, these type of cases aren't as prevalent as people believe. And I asked him, so when was your last actual demonic case? And he said, Mike, it was actually that case that you and I were in on together in Edmond, Oklahoma. So here's a guy that's been doing this for like over 50 years. And his last case was 10 years ago, the same one that I was on. So yeah, they're not as common as television likes to believe, but they do happen. They do exist.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I've had many other paranormal investigators, researchers on the show. And I always do like to ask that question, one, because I have not experienced it myself. Not that I'm totally disbelieving of it, just that it does seem to be, there's very similar responses to what you just said. Either one, it's very rare, or a lot of people say I've never came across it. And I'm wondering, in your all your years of being involved investigating, researching this stuff, do you think people are sometimes willing to too quickly make that leap? They're having experience in their home, or they know somebody's having experience. Has that been your experience, that people sometimes make that leap too fast?
Curry, you took the thoughts right out of my head, because I was just thinking before you asked that question of telling a story. And I use this example all the time because I have received an email like this, somebody asking me for help because, they're saying, I believe I have a demon, or can you help me? I have a demon in my house. And I asked them, okay, why do you think you have a demon in your house? Well, because a candle flew off my mantle. That was it. That was the only activity. A candle flew off my mantle. It's like, well, okay, let's back up here. Just because a candle flew off your mantle, it does not mean you have a demon. But, that's what, the television and film and the movies and our pop culture sensationalized everything to be demonic. And, there are, like we were just talking about, there are real demonic cases, but, most of the time, it could have been, telekinesis or something like that. It could have been just, your neighborhood ghost, coming in. It could have been, who knows? It could have been a trimmer, right? But, a lot of times, these, if it is a spirit that we're interacting with, it is some sort of human spirit that's there at the house. Maybe it's trying to get your attention. It doesn't have to be demonic.
Sure. Yeah, and I think you kind of, it was interesting. You made the point that whether you want to call them ghosts or spirits, you know, the way they were in life, perhaps when they cross over on the other side, that's the way they behave on the other side as well. So, yeah, I've kind of found that too, that sometimes people tend to make that leap far too quickly. And perhaps, somebody's getting pinched, scratched, clothes pulled on, whatever the case. Perhaps maybe that entity's just trying to get your attention. And maybe
Yeah.
they've already tried to. Yeah, I find that too. And I think it's important to kind of, put some reality to the paranormal. And I always try and kind of do that as well on my show. Not that, I've had a guest on here that talked about, the demonic and his experiences with it. Yeah, it just seems to be most of the people you talk to, it is either very rare or people just have not experienced it at all. People involved in the paranormal, even. Now, you've been involved how many years now, Mike, doing this?
Yeah. Well, I end up saying in some way, shape, or form for 30 years. My very first paranormal investigation that I was talking about earlier, that was a good 30 years ago now. Now, I haven't been investigating full time or whatever for throughout that entire time. When I was a younger guy, I was kind of learning the ropes and researching and kind of whatever I could pick up here and there. Again, we're talking pre-internet days. There weren't really television shows, to kind of inspire one to go. You didn't know what a paranormal investigator was really back then, and I was in a small town that was very limited. So it was whatever I could get my hands on. And then, when the internet, finally kind of took off and you're connecting with people, which was great. Okay, here's all these websites and forums and groups. Okay, now we're talking, we're connecting, learning what an EVP is. Actually, the Sixth Sense taught me that one. When Bruce Willis is going through the tape, and it's like, okay, I could do that. So I'm trying different things. So yeah, it was kind of like sporadic, I was like, a young guy and, I had started a family and all that. So it was, kind of piecemeal here and there as far as my involvement, but it was really like the mid 2000s, when I started researching my first book, Ghosts of Maryland, that, things kind of, really started taking off for me. And I got into this more of what you'd call full time.
Yeah, no, when you first started doing this, that was certainly a different time. You had the explosion of the paranormal shows. I know Ghost Hunters came out, I think, 2004. That's kind of one that I started taking interest in. I know there's been a few others, earlier ones, but how much do you think that has influenced the paranormal field, good and bad?
Yeah, Scariest Places on Earth was the one that I first got into just before Ghost Hunters. Yeah, it's had a really big influence. You're right, both good and bad. And I think it has had. We've kind of talked about the negative effects of it, where they've sensationalized demonic activity, so now everybody believes that they have a demon in their home, or they'll kind of trump up a lot more what's actually going on in their home to try to get onto a television show. We experienced that in some of our investigations as well, where they do have some paranormal activity going on within the home, but they start creating things and making things up, or we've had ones that are using the ghost apps to say, look what's happening in our home, and we're like, okay, we're out of here now because you did have something going on, but now you're faking evidence to us because we've been involved with television and you're trying to get on a show, which is really, really sad because it's we could have helped them, but once you start lying to us, we're done. So that's really sad. But what the television shows have done, and even the advent of the internet preceding that, kind of like I was describing, connecting with people, what television has done a great job of is showing people, hey, all these other people out there are having these experiences. You are not alone. It used to be that if you talked about having a paranormal experience or seeing something or hearing voices or what have you, then you're going to find yourself in a straitjacket and locked away somewhere. And so you just didn't talk about it, you kept your mouth shut. So what the television shows have done is they've allowed people to feel more relaxed about it and come forward and share their stories. I get asked a lot if, I think that there's more paranormal activity going on right now, if there's more sightings. And, my answer to that is really like, well, I don't know if it's really, there's more of it now as it is people are feeling more comfortable now telling their story. And TV has done a great job of that.
Yeah, I would agree. At least it's certainly opened up the conversation for a lot of
Yes.
people. People are a lot more willing to talk about it. You have an explosion of paranormal groups all across the internet, social media. There's always, it's so much easier nowadays for someone to reach out and talk to somebody about it,
Oh, for sure.
uh, and I think some people are just looking. You touched on that validation aspect of this. Your mom had experienced something that you had experienced, and for a lot of people, that's just important to them. That alone is important to them because they're looking for validation. Hey, I don't want to think I'm crazy experiencing this, and somebody else saying, "Yeah, I saw the same thing," or "I saw something similar." You're not alone. I think that really helps people to kind of, at least feel like there's some validation for what they've experienced.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And that was a big part of my Encounters with the Paranormal series, because those books don't just have stories from me, they're stories from people from all over. So if somebody can't relate to my experiences, I have all these other stories from all these other people. Maybe you can relate to somebody else's in there and realize, like you were saying, yeah, I'm not crazy, I'm not alone. There are other people that have witnessed this very thing too.
sure. Yeah, I wanted to get back to this these shadow entities that
Mhm.
we were just talking about earlier. There has been, it seems there's been some connection between sleep paralysis and experiencing these shadow entities. And can you talk a little bit about what you found out about that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is I have an entire section in my book, A Walk in the Shadows, on this, because it's kind of a pet peeve of mine when it comes to sleep paralysis and shadow entities. Because the medical community would like you to believe that when you wake up in the middle of the night and you see a shadow entity and you're experiencing sleep paralysis, that it's just a hallucination, that is part of your dream manifesting in real life. Now, sleep paralysis is a real biological phenomenon. It is something that happens. Your body does paralyze itself while you're sleeping, so that you don't act out your dreams in the middle of the night. And sometimes when you wake up, from a dream, you are still experiencing that paralysis. It can happen the opposite way too, where and this is the way it's happened to me. I have experienced sleep paralysis a couple of times, in which your body becomes so exhausted that it basically turns off, but your mind is still awake. And when that first happened to me, and I was a young guy, like 20, 21 years old, and I was actually at work at the time, but I had been spending a lot of nights up late, and I'm just sitting there, and all of a sudden, boom, my body turned off, but my mind was still awake, and I couldn't move, which was really scary at the time. What in the world do I do? I'm at work, I could get in trouble, I can't move. Am I going to be stuck here for long? What do I do? And I did find a way. I just, started thinking, okay, can I at least wiggle a toe? And so I started there, and okay, I was able to wiggle one. Can I wiggle another? Can I wiggle my foot? That sort of thing. Worked my way up to wake my body up until my brain finally woke back up. Did not see any shadow people. And in all the shadow people experiences that I've had nothing to do with sleep. Most of them I was on a paranormal investigation. Others that I saw at home, like Tom in my doorway, I'm putting things away. And the very first shadow person experience I had was the only one that was even related to sleep, but I had already woken up. And I certainly wasn't paralyzed, because my mouth opened, my arms crossed. When the thing ran off down the hall, I turned my head to watch it go. So I wasn't paralyzed during that. But this is what the medical community tells us. And I have a couple of issues with this. For one, like I already said, we see shadows in a lot of different situations, not just as a part of our sleep cycle, but also we dream about a lot of different things. They're saying it's a hallucination from our dream that's acting out because we're still paralyzed and kind of caught between two states of mind. But we dream about a lot of different things, not just people. We dream about, cars, we dream about airplanes, or there might be a tree in our dream. I've had dreams of being on stage with Motley Crue, and I've never woken up to, 10,000 people in my room and pyrotechnics going off and the drum kit and the guitars, and it would be a lot of fun, but it's never happened. It's always people experience a shadow. Okay. So what I think is happening here is these are two different phenomenon happening at the same time. Sleep paralysis being a real phenomenon and shadow people being a real phenomenon. Now, my kids were notorious for this, and anybody who's been a parent will relate that. Your kids will walk up to your bed in the middle of the night because they've had a bad dream, they need a drink of water, need to go to the bathroom, whatever it is. But they'll come up to your bed in the middle of the night, and they might tap you on the shoulder or shake you or whatever. But my kids were notorious for just standing there, especially my youngest son, Cameron. He would just stand at the side of the bed. And finally, I'd wake up and go, oh, geez, Cameron, what are you doing? He'd be like, I had a bad dream, I need a drink of water, whatever it is. So what is it that woke me up? Well, we each have what's known as toroidal energy that surrounds us, that emanates from us. The Heart Math Institute has done a lot of research on this, and this energy that we have will extend out several feet. So when, like my son Cameron was coming up to my bed when he was very little, I was feeling his energy, his presence next to me, and that's what woke me up, because he did not physically touch me. So what I believe is happening here is that we are feeling the presence of that shadow person in our rooms, that we are feeling its energy there, and that's what wakes us up. But sometimes we end up in sleep paralysis because it's a natural biological thing. And then, we wake up, we're paralyzed, we see this thing standing in our room, suddenly we get frightened and all those emotions, and it becomes this very scary moment. But really, it's just two different phenomena happening at the same time.
These are not necessarily negative entities. Why do you think they appear? Why people see them? I mean, I know it's probably $1 million question, but
yeah,
I'm sure you get asked that a lot. What do they want?
You're right. That is the $1 million question. What do they want? Especially the ones that are just standing there and watching you. Why are they watching? Why are they observing? There are some that we can get answers for. My friend Rob Guthrie, he's a psychic medium, and he has a story about one that's it was a shadow entity at the end of his bed, but it was actually his aunt, and his aunt wanted him to deliver a message to his mother, which would have been, her sister. So, okay. So we have a reason for that one. It's an interesting story that I include in, Walk in the Shadows, that had to do with a hooded figure that kept walking into the bedroom of this little boy, and the mother would see this happen. He was a very ill child, and could not figure out medically what was going on with him. And so she thought, this was an entity that was going to take him. But as it turns out, there was a day that, in the doctor's office where, the doctor was just going to run the same tests over again that they had been. And all of a sudden he turns his head, and to her, it looked like he was listening to somebody whisper in his ear, even though there wasn't anybody there. And then he turns back around, orders like a whole completely different set of tests, and they discover what was actually wrong with the boy, and they were able to treat him, and he was fine. Never saw the shadow entity again. So her belief is that this shadow just was there to take care of the boy, looking in on him, and even though she couldn't see it in the doctor's office, had been the one to whisper in his ear the tests are run. So they could have a lot of different reasons for being here, again, depending on the shadow. The big question is, what do the ones want that are standing there watching and observing us? Are these, again, it kind of depends on what they are. If they're interdimensional beings, are they studying us, from that other dimension? Same thing with ETs. What do they want to learn about us? Because some of these shadows could be ETs. If it's a time traveler, it could be somebody from the future and observing things that happened in the past. It kind of depends on what that shadow entity actually is to get the answer of what might they want.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting because you touched on the extraterrestrial aspect of this. This is what to me, and I use the term paranormal in a little bit broader scope than some people do. You often hear people when they use the term paranormal, they're typically talking about, ghosts and spirits and that sort of thing. But this is also to me in a larger sense, what's so interesting and so fascinating about the paranormal is because there's so many things that could, there's so many different potential explanations for all these strange kind of things going on, what people experience, whether it could be extraterrestrial, interdimensional, a dead relative. But that is what's so interesting to me about exploring the paranormal is exploring all these other possibilities about this stuff and whether some of this stuff is, interrelated.
Well, yeah, a lot of it. Well, to me, it is all interrelated and connected. That's why I have the connected universe, some way, shape, or form. It all comes back to itself. It's all connected in some fashion, and yeah, that's why a lot of times these days, I use the term supernatural rather than paranormal. But it's funny that I mentioned Hans Holzer earlier because I've read a lot of his work growing up, and a quote that I love from him is that there is no supernatural. Everything is natural. We're just seeing things that we don't normally see is what's happening. But yeah, there's a wide range of different phenomena out there, and somehow, some way, shape, or form, it's all connected to each other.
And yeah, I think that's what makes this so interesting to delve into. As I went further into the paranormal, I kind of branched out into covering things, UFOs and extraterrestrial topics and Bigfoot, Mandela effect, all these
Hmm.
different things. And it just seems to open up such a wider, range of possibilities about what's going on. Do we live in a multiverse? Are we sometimes experiencing bleed overs from another dimension? All of these things kind of come into play instead of kind of this narrow view that, perhaps if,
Yeah.
you're doing an investigation that this is simply someone who's passed on. And then you get into this aspect of, is what we're experiencing just people who have not wanted to move on to that other side, whatever that may be? Are they kind of stuck here because of unfinished business? What's kind of your experience or your sense of when you're experiencing getting EVPs, or what you think maybe people that are here? Is it people that have unfinished business? What's kind of your take on that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think people, they want like a one cookie cutter answer, like this is the explanation and this is the only explanation. And I think we have a large variety of different explanations for these things. Yeah, I mean, sometimes they are human spirits that just haven't moved on. They're still roaming around. They have some reason for being here. Like when my grandfather passed away some years ago, he hung around. He was visiting other family members, and when my grandmother passed away some years after him, never saw him again, never saw my grandma. Basically it was like they went off together. He was just hanging around until she passed away. So
Right.
that's a great story. But some of these other things, you mentioned the Mandela effect. It could be time slips. There's a lot of other things going on here. I've heard plenty of stories from people where they saw apparitions appear, and those apparitions looked at them like they were the ghost, like something out of the movie The Others. And so it's like, okay, so that's that seems more like a time slip where two moments in time resonated at the exact same moment, and they were able to see each other, which is absolutely fascinating. So that's not that's not a haunting. Those aren't like human spirits that just decided to hang around here on Earth. It's just simply two moments in time playing out, and they just happen to see each other. So yeah, there's a plethora of different things that are going on in this universe. There's not just one answer. And unfortunately, people just want that very simplified, this is what a ghost is, this is this is what a shadow person is. And it's just there's no one answer for these things.
Sure. Now, Mike, when you started doing this originally, is that kind of, I mean, were you more kind of more of the narrow view of this, or were you just thinking, ghosts are basically people that have passed on or maybe have moved on, or have you just kind of expanded your horizons as you went further into this?
That's a great question. And yeah, I have expanded my horizon. So, in the introduction of the book, A Walk in the Shadows, I've put in there, I reserve the right to change my mind because, throughout my journey, I've learned a lot more. And, I have changed my opinion at times. This is a field in which I think, well, really any field, I think we need to keep that open mind and be willing to change it. You see some of these other fields, especially like the sciences, like, archaeology and other areas in which, they put forth an idea and they stand steadfast on it for so long, even with all this other, information that's getting thrown at them that states otherwise. A great example is the age of the Sphinx, which very clearly has water weathering within the Sphinx enclosure, but so many Egyptologists are steadfast, like, no, it's only like 4,000 years old or whatever. And it's like the geologic evidence, geologists are saying no, it's 10,000 years old, but they will stand steadfast that no, it's not 10,000 years old or even older. Just because it would, they would have to change the books or whatever they would have to do. And I think you need to keep an open mind and be willing to change your opinion. I have this book now, A Walk in the Shadows, A Complete Guide to Shadow People, and I've changed my mind on them over the years. You kind of have to. When I was a much younger guy, I was like, no, a ghost is a ghost, a human spirit's a human spirit, a shadow person is, I was just steadfast that a shadow person was strictly its own thing. And back then I wasn't sure if they were interdimensional or not, but I was just said, they are their own type of entity. And over the years, I had so many people coming forward because I would give presentations on this. I had so many people coming forward saying, well, Mike, I've had this experience, like my friend Rob that I talked about, in which he knew for certain this was his aunt, could only come off as a shadow to deliver the message to his mother. And so I heard stories like that for years and years. Like, okay, I'll keep an open mind. Perhaps some of these are actually human spirits. And then I finally see the one where it's a rolling black smoke and it morphs into the apparition of a little girl. It's like, okay, now I've actually seen the evidence that, yeah, some of these are actually human spirits because it's a little girl. So
it's in the pudding, sure.
Yeah. So you have to be willing to change your mind and keep an open mind in these things because we're all still learning. There's so much to learn in this world. And we know, like maybe 1% of what's really going on in this universe. So we have to keep an open mind in these things.
Yeah, it would seem we're just scratching the surface. We're at the tip of the iceberg. Had Rob on the show a while ago. I'm glad you mentioned him. Great guest. Had some really, really interesting discussion with him. I want to talk about doppelgangers. That's another subject area you've delved into. What have you kind of gleaned from your research on this strange phenomena?
Yeah, these are kind of interesting. Because a lot of people, and you have the old myths and legends and folklore about doppelgangers being evil twins, and and we're not talking about celebrity lookalikes. And somebody, oh geez, last summer I had somebody helping me with some of my video work on the Hunter Road Media YouTube channel, and for the intro to the doppelganger video, they were doing celebrity lookalikes, and I'm like, no, this is. This has nothing to do with celebrity lookalikes. Come on. But yeah, like the Vargers, which are the old Norse legends. These are like the evil twins. But kind of what I've discovered. And there may be some evil twin stuff out there and what have you. But what I've discovered from at least some of these accounts over the years, like the poet Goethe, he tells of this story of traveling to this city, which he was gonna meet up with this young woman, and walking along the side of the road was this man in this very distinct gray suit, and he he notices, okay, that's an interesting guy, with this suit. Years later, he's walking down that same road in the opposite direction, and as he's passing that point, he realizes, wait a second, I'm the guy in the suit. He had actually seen himself years later. And there's other stories like this. My friend Meg Fisher, in the house that she grew up, which was a very haunted house, she tells this story of, she had woken up in the middle of the night because she thought she heard like pots and pans in the kitchen. She thought her mother was home. Her mother worked very late at night. And so she was wondering, is my mom home? So she goes out into the kitchen. Didn't see her mom at first, but all of a sudden she sees her mom walk through the back door, which I guess was the garage, into the kitchen. And, and she recognizes her mother in her favorite clothes that she was wearing, this sweater and jeans and what have you. And her mother looks at her, gives her this really strange look, and then runs off down the hall and into the bedroom. So Meg runs after her, gets to the bedroom, opens the door, and the mother's in bed. So, she goes up to the mother, taps her on the shoulder, and then notices, wait, mom's in her nightgown. And she's talking to her like, Mom, were you just in the kitchen? She's like, no, I've been home for hours. I wasn't feeling well. I came home, went to bed. And so, Meg is saying, okay, so this was some sort of doppelganger of my mother. But I'm hearing that story, and to me, the thing that immediately came to mind was, wait a minute. Yeah, she did see her mother at another point in time. To me, this was some sort of time slip. And I think this is what Gutta experienced, was some sort of time slip where he had seen himself walking down the road at another point in time. I think what happened with Meg was, she saw her mother walk into the house at some other point in time, and her mother saw her too. So with Meg, it would have been, some sort of age difference, which is probably why she gave her the strange look. Either her daughter being older or younger than what she was supposed to be, and that's probably why she went running off. So some of these doppelganger experiences, I don't necessarily think are the whole evil twin legend. I think some of them are actually images of ourselves, some sort of time slip. We're actually seeing ourselves at another point in time.
Wow. Yeah, I forgot to comment. You mentioned the movie The Others. Boy, that movie threw me for a loop.
Oh, that was an amazing twist. I loved it.
Brilliant plot. Really was. It really was the way that played out. But getting back to the doppelgangers, there's also this, I don't know if it's myth or folklore or, what you want to call it. One of the stories behind doppelgangers is if you do see your doppelganger, you're going to die. So that's
that harbinger of death. Yeah. So well, Gutta didn't die right away, and Meg and her mother still live for quite a while. So one of those legends, right?
Sure. Now, I also wanted to get into the topic of poltergeist, because I know that that's always a big topic in the paranormal, and I think you've kind of delved into this as well. What has, in terms of poltergeist, because there's this theory that psychokinesis may cause poltergeist activity, young females. There's often poltergeist activity been associated with young females. I'm kind of on the fence on this. I don't, I'm not really sure on this. What have you kind of uncovered with your research on this?
I've been on cases like that where we were able to trace the activity in the house back to the young girl in the house. It doesn't necessarily have to be a female. That's just a higher percentage of them happen to be young females, but it could actually be a boy as well, or a man or a woman. It could be somebody older as well. So I like that you said paranormal, or I'm sorry, you said poltergeist activity, because there's a difference between a poltergeist and poltergeist activity, and I've noticed the last several years that when people have talked about a poltergeist, they automatically go to the telekinesis or the PK activity. They're like, well, that's what a poltergeist actually is. Like, oh wait, let's take a step back. Right. A poltergeist is actually, it's German for noisy ghost. It is actually a spirit that's in the house that's creating a bit of a ruckus. They're moving things around. They could be throwing things around, whatever. Anybody who's read the Harry Potter books, when J.K. Rowling describes Peeves the poltergeist, it's actually a very good description of what a poltergeist actually does. They're being mischievous, and they're doing things to kind of cause a little bit of havoc, and that is a poltergeist. It's a spirit doing that. Poltergeist activity is basically that telekinesis, that PK activity from a human that is doing things that resemble what a poltergeist would normally do. So yeah, that's poltergeist activity caused by PK activity or telekinesis. And so this can happen again, like you said, in young girls, young women who are kind of like coming into age, and they have all of this pent up emotion that's just expelling outward.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So it brings into play the power of our thoughts, our minds, all it, again, it just kind of this expansive, kinds of things, phenomena, possibilities of these kinds of strange phenomena that we can't explain.
Curry, I'll tell you one. I don't normally talk about this on a podcast like this. I've done a video on this, but something that's a little bit different to think about when talking about poltergeist activity or PK activity. Robert the Doll. It's Gene Otto was the boy associated with Robert the Doll, who loved his doll so much. They were inseparable, and then Robert was supposed to be causing all of this havoc. And a lot of people thought that the doll was possessed, but actually, what I think this was, I think it was a very, very concentrated form of PK activity, very concentrated form of telekinesis, in which instead of all of that poltergeist activity happening outward within the house, I think Gene was able to channel that, probably unbeknownst to him, into one specific thing, which was Robert the Doll. So while it seemed like Robert was doing all of these different things, it was actually from Gene into the doll and acting outward. So it's a very, very different thought on that case, but I think it really plays well with this idea of poltergeist activity.
Wow, that's intriguing because I've never heard of that explanation before. Oftentimes you get that, Robert the Doll is perhaps possessed by some sort of demonic entity.
Yeah, I don't think that's it. And the curse at the there at the museum now with the doll and all that. If that doll is still haunted, I think it's haunted by Gene.
Wow. That's an interesting take on that. Now, you're doing some research for a new book. How soon is that book going to be coming out?
Yeah, so I have a lot of things in the works. The big project right now is The Shadow Dimension, which is a docuseries based on a walk in the shadows. The book I'm currently working on a couple. So one is in relation to the connected universe, which is like you said at the beginning of the show, the courses, the membership site, and all of that. The website is connecteduniverseportal.com. I'm also doing one on the Alaskan Triangle. I was on the show last year. I spent 3 years up there in Alaska during the early to mid 90s, and so I'm in the process of working on that book as well. So I have a lot of projects in the works right now.
Yeah, so that was the one I was hitting on, was the Alaskan Triangle. Mm-hmm. How did you get involved or wanting to research that, and what so far has fascinated you so much about this Alaskan Triangle mystery?
Yeah, the Alaska Triangle, a lot of interesting phenomena that happens up there. Basically, think of the Bermuda Triangle, but up in Alaska. We have a lot of these different areas around the world. There's the Dragon Triangle out there by Japan, Bridgewater Triangle in Massachusetts. There's the Lake Michigan Triangle, and they all have similar traits where you have missing boats and planes, missing people, a lot of strange entities and sightings, UFO activity, things of this nature. And so these are things that have really intrigued me. With the Alaska Triangle, I've done a lot of work on researching portal and vortex activity, and really what happened was the producers from the show had come across one of those videos. They were looking for somebody to talk about that on the Alaska Triangle show, and so we got to chatting a little bit, and they discovered that I'd spent those 3 years in Alaska, so it was just like a perfect fit to go up there and talk about that and do that research. But that basically inspired me. I have all of this background, I have all of this knowledge. People are interested. I've had so many people reach out to me about that show and the things that we had researched and experienced on there. So naturally, I started writing the book.
Now, there's been a lot of strange disappearances up there. I know you had I think it was in the 1970s, you had a congressman aboard a flight that just simply disappeared. A lot of other strange disappearances. There's been a ton of them. There's been movies made. I think it was The Fifth Kind was one of them. But what's your sense of what may be behind some of these disappearances? You think it's potentially extraterrestrial abductions, or is it kind of the jury's still out?
Yeah, with the disappearances, I don't necessarily think it's extraterrestrial. There's certainly a lot of extraterrestrial activity up there, no doubt about that. But I think where the disappearances come into play is when you start dealing with the the vortex activity of the triangle itself, where it will spawn off these different portals. Like the disappearance of the Douglas Skymaster back in 1950. A lot of people attribute that one to disappearing through a portal. I mean, that could have happened to Hale Boggs and Nick Begich, the politicians that disappeared there in the 70s, and so many other disappearances that happen up there as well. And it's not true for every disappearance. We're not saying that, because there are certainly people that go walking off into the woods and just get lost. I mean, Alaska is 2.5 times the size of Texas, so there's a lot of room to get lost up there. But
Sure.
A lot of these are just really uncanny. And like when I first got up there, this was 1992, and the land is so volatile. There's volcanic activity. The Mount Spur had just erupted when I got up there. I'm walking in, and there's like ash still falling from the sky, and I'm working with computer equipment. We're having to dust off the computers every single day. It was insane. It was earthquakes, popping off here and there up there. That April '93, there was an airplane taking off from the Anchorage airport, and all of a sudden, the engine falls right off the thing into a supermarket parking lot. So it's just all these bizarre things keep happening up there.
Yeah, so this perhaps, these vortexes, I mean, is this possibly a doorway into another dimension? I mean, is this the kind of thing we're talking about when you say, things perhaps just disappear?
Yeah, that's kind of the idea, when that Skymaster disappeared, and people speculated it going into a portal. And I've seen this sort of activity on some of my paranormal investigations, where I've witnessed activity. Just an example is actually a shadow person incident. It really was just like a wisp of a shadow. It was tall, narrow, translucent, so fast. It darted across this kitchen at a restaurant. And you heard it blow through this like flimsy metal door on the sidewall. It was just like one of those doors that waiters and waitresses use to carry large trays of food through. You could tap the thing with your finger and it would just open up. But even though you heard it slam into that door, the thing didn't move. So it's like, what in the world happened here? Anybody could just touch it and it would open. So and I'm thinking, what happened here is that, because as I walked into that room, it was like I scared this thing. We were talking about the others earlier, so maybe it saw me as a ghost or saw me as a shadow or something, and I scared it. And I believe this was a crossing of dimensions, and I believe in its plane of existence, it blew right through that door and ran off into the restaurant. But sound works on a different wavelength, and so I was able to hear it even though I didn't actually see it. And so when we talk about some of these missing airplanes, and specifically this Douglas Skymaster, because that's the one that we talked about on the show, having gone through a possible portal, like a day or two later, there was radio chatter that was picked up. It was kind of garbled. Couldn't quite make it out. So the idea is that because the plane was never found, and there was, where it was last heard from, there was a smaller plane like a month later that was found right there that had crashed, and everybody was fine. But it's like, okay, how in the world does a smaller plane crash? We're able to find that, but we can't find this whole huge plane that went down. It was a beautiful day. It just didn't make any sense. Yet we caught the radio chatter, and it ended up fading out. So the idea is that portal opened up. It went through the portal because sound, again, working at a different wavelength, passed back through the portal. We were able to hear it. And I'll even throw this into the mix because this is, one of the things I'm going into as a possibility in my Alaska Triangle book. There's a lot of legends up in Alaska about thunderbirds. These are old really Native American legends from all over the country, not just Alaska, but the Native Alaskans up there talk about these thunderbird legends as well, and they talk about these massive birds having 40, 50, 100-foot wingspans, long ago. Well, if we're talking that some of these travels into these different portals are time slips, that we're actually going into another point in time, what's to say 500 years ago, these Native Alaskans are, seeing this airplane fly overhead, comes through the portal into their point in time. They see the airplane fly overhead. What are they going to relate it to? They have no idea from an airplane 500 years ago. It's a large bird. It's very loud. We're going to call it a thunderbird.
Wow. My mind is blown. It's very it's very intriguing because some of the stuff you're talking about I've never really discussed never really heard this take on it, so it's very interesting. You hear of a lot of disappearances like David Paulides is investigated and missing 411. And I just had Terry Lovelace on the show last episode. We were talking about the guy that back in 2016 went missing in Devil's Den State Park, and later was found. His skull, I think, was the only remnants they found initially. They scoured that whole woods in the area that he had been in. They didn't find a single trace of him. Just no evidence of him whatsoever. And then about a year later, they find that evidence, and it's just, it's mind-boggling to think how that is even possible that happened. So, anyways, Mike, it's been great talking with you. Very, very fascinating conversation. Where can people find more about your work? I know we mentioned already mentioned the Collective Universe website. Where else can they go to find your books and your work?
Yeah, like you mentioned, connecteduniverseportal.com. My main website is MikeRicksecker.com. You can also find me at the Haunted Road Media YouTube channel. I got like 700 videos out there right now, and then I do the weekly Edge of the Rabbit Hole show on Tuesday nights. That's on the Edge of the Rabbit Hole YouTube channel as well. And then all the information for the Shadow Dimension docuseries that's coming up here this spring, you can find at shadowdimension.com.
Cool. Great. Thanks a lot, Mike, for joining me. I really appreciate it, and have a great rest of your night.
Thanks, you too, Curry. I absolutely appreciate it.
You said